So first of all, I want to officially thank Prof. Nagma Parveen, who supported us and helped us in logistics to make this session possible, which initially seemed impossible to conduct online, at least at students level. So this is the student-faculty relation of IIT Kanpur. So I'll request the speakers of the session to please start the session.
Yeah, so the flow of the session is as follows. I'll be covering what management consulting is and why you should go for management consulting. Then Vedanth and Manali would be covering the selection process and how do you prepare for the interviews. And then Anshika at last would be giving you a case problem to solve. She'll be interacting with you throughout the case, and we'll also pitch in a few times. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so let's begin with the overview of management consulting. Next slide. That's why I wanted to share myself. All right. Next slide, please. So what do management consultants do? In short, to keep it simple, they help their clients solve their problems. Of course, this is not enough. We need to get into more detail. So according to this page, what do we do section in the page of McKinsey and Company, it goes something like this, that we serve clients at every level of their organization in whatever capacity we can be most useful. Next sort of animation, please. Yeah. So the key questions, who are the clients and why do they hire consulting firms? Next slide. So basically, the clients are mostly the Fortune 1000 companies like Coca-Cola and Microsoft. They can also be some investors like private equity firms. They can be government, and they can be the NGOs. Now, why do they hire consulting firms is the key question here. So obviously, the companies themselves have their own in-depth knowledge of their industry. Like for example, a steel industry would be knowing their markets, and they'd be working there since quite some time. So obviously, why would they need to hire consultants? So consultants basically come into the picture for primarily three reasons. The first one is provide the functional expertise. For example, if there is, for example, take a case of an electronics manufacturer and a big enough electronics manufacturer, and say suppose they want to merge with another electronics manufacturer of their own size. Now, both of these companies individually have performed some mergers and acquisitions, but they have not done it at this level, right? So, I mean, they can do it on their own, but they will not be confident because of the big picture. Now, where MBB comes is that throughout these years, they have gathered their expertise by performing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. So they can obviously help these two firms undergo this process more smoothly. Right. So this is just an example of mergers and acquisition. There can be marketing, there can be launching of a new product, a lot of things, right? So this is the first reason. The second is objective opinion. So here, take an example of a large multi-year investment, and so suppose the board of directors for suppose there are 10 members in a board of directors room, and 5 are in support of a new investment, while 5 are against it. Now you need a fresh eyes on this topic, and here again the consultants come into the picture. And the third reason is that some of the companies require on-demand brains. So for example, a private equity firm, they would be hiring management consultants to perform their due diligences. Other than that, you can take, for example, another company in which their current employees are all staffed on different projects, right? So now a new problem comes into the picture, and now they need new fresh brains to tackle that problem. So again, in this picture, management consultants come into the picture. So this is broadly what management consultants do. Next slide, please. So typical projects, as I mentioned before, for example, here's a report in which the city council in Dallas hires BCG to provide strategic recommendations to improve public safety and animal welfare. So like, this is a very different sort of non-conventional case in which the government hires BCG to, for animal safety. And another example is that USPS, government organization of the US, they are facing some unprecedented losses, and they have hired McKinsey to find out why these losses are happening, and they need a strategic plan to overcome this problem. So these are the two typical projects example. Next slide, please. Now, an obvious question is why you should choose management consulting. Next slide. So the role of the consultant is the biggest perk. What do I mean by that? The first one is make big picture decision. So unlike other roles in which you're solving small mini problems, here you get to make a very big decision. For example, whether you should invest in this company, $1 million deals, $1 billion deals, and whether this would be profitable in a next 10 years. So these are all big decisions, right? Which will give you a lot of confidence and also, improve your career drastically. Second, you gain exposure to various industries. So typical project lengths are around 2 to 3 months in these industries. You can obviously go for long-term projects, 1 year, 2 years. But yeah, so there is a lot of change of projects. Therefore, you get to explore various industries from all the way from steel manufacturing to aircraft industries to private equity, all the industries. Third is awesome peer-to-peer learning. So your peers, just like you, have worked in a lot of these industries, right? So so at the end of the day, when you meet your peers, you get to learn a lot from them, right? And the last is boardroom sharing with CEO investors. Obviously, when a client hires you, you get to discuss with them in detail about their businesses, and not just CEOs. Or at all the levels of the firm, you'll be interacting with the client, and you'll get to know a lot from them, obviously. And again, this is a very good experience. Next slide, please. So yeah, the attrition rate in is consulting is quite high. So one really has to ask the question that what are the options after consulting? So the answer is you can do anything, and I actually mean that, because the way I have described consulting, you must be getting a feel now that you'll be having a lot of knowledge. So obviously you can do a lot with that knowledge. It completely depends upon you. The typical examples are maybe you can go for an MBA, Harvard, Stanford, if you want to go abroad, and a lot of other options are there. The second is venture capitalists, private equity. You can, since you have a lot of knowledge about various industries, you can actually go in these industries. And another typical exit option is founder of a CEO, founder of a startup. Yeah. Next slide. So Vedant and Manali will be taking over from here.
Hey, hi guys. Once again, just clarifying, I'm joining Bain and Company and not Boston Consulting Group. But yeah, Willem, next slide, please. Yeah, so typically I'll just describe the whole selection process, right? So firstly, once the mail comes in, right, it approximately, they give approximately 1 week to you to submit their resumes. And once the resumes are submitted, they again take 7 to 10 days to shortlist the resumes. I'll cover what are the factors they consider in shortlisting your resumes. But yeah, that's the first process. After that, they'll take approximately 10 days, as I said, to shortlist your resumes, and then there would be a buddy process in between. And what I've observed, I mean, over my recruiting season, is that people take this buddy process as formality, but this is a huge important source of resource for you to tap into. So what buddy process is that they'll typically assign alums typically from IIT Kanpur who have been in these consulting firms, and they'll help you prepare for your cases. And these cases sometimes are evaluative and sometimes are not evaluative. So what happens is for you is that you will be assigned a buddy and he'll be practicing cases with you. And there are two important takeaways that you can do from here, right? So if you're I would typically suggest you to have hello.
Yeah, you're audible now.
Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, I would suggest you to take these buddy process pretty seriously, because there are two things that you can do from here is right. So first is you can improve on your case preparation. So once you
You are not audible.
Vedant, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think there's some internet issue from my end. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yep. So what I was saying is that there are two things you can do, right? So once your preparation is done, you can fine tune your case solving process. So what one takeaway that I took from my Bain buddy was that I was in terms of case solving, I was pretty good, but in terms of the recommendations that I could give at the end of the case, right? I think Anshika will cover the entire case process, but in terms of the recommendations that I could give, I was not structured in terms of the recommendations. So I would just blur out what are the problems and what are the recommendations that could be given. But what my buddy told me was you can structure it pretty well. So you can give your recommendations as follows: that these are the top two problems that are there, and these are the top three ways that you can solve these problems. So that's the number one takeaway that I would suggest from the buddy process. And number two would be in terms of the key nuances about the individual consulting firms, right? So all of the consulting firms would say that there is a steep learning curve. There's you can work with amazing team members, but it is also about what sort of culture or personality fit that you can have with these individual firms. And these are the answers that would probably differentiate yourself with your peers in terms of the final partner rounds, where they will specifically ask why do you want to join BCG over the other two firms, or why do you want to join Bain over the other two firms. So buddies are typically you should take them very seriously, and you should utilize them completely. That would be my suggestion. And third, after that, the third stage is the interview process, the main interview process, where you will typically have 3 to 5 rounds, rounds with managers, associate partners, and a couple of rounds with senior partners. This year was an exception for some of the people, but yeah, over the years there are 3 to 5 rounds. Yep. And yeah, once you clear all these 3 stages, you can definitely have a party. But yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so again, I mean, just repeating Amit's disclaimer that he gave in the beginning, right? These are the dimensions that we found from our own experience, as well as what we have observed in the past years. We have not yet joined our respective consulting firms, so we don't have much idea about how the actual shortlisting works. But there are typically 4 dimensions, right? First of them, and the obvious one, is the academics, and there are different ways you can portray each of these dimensions. In terms of academics, one of the obvious ones is the CPI. Second, you can show any sort of awards that you have received within campus or even before campus. These are your academic excellence award or any scholarships that you receive from SSPC. There are obviously also your NTSE Olympiads, etc. And research papers would also come into this domain. Any sort of publication that you have done in international journals, or you have been part of any sort of conference. So these are the different ways that you can portray your academics in a good way. Second would be experience. And what I've again observed is that people typically consider day one corporate internships or week one corporate internships as the sort of best thing over here. But over the years, people have also taken up international research internships at premier universities abroad, and that has helped them get a shortlist. People have also founded startups, been a co-founder of a startup, or have been part of a startup where they have shown significant impact. I mean, these startups probably none of us would have heard names of, but the work that they did over there was super impactful. So this is also another way to show portray your experience. And third obvious one is the positions of responsibility within campus. And fourth are the extracurricular activities. I mean, either at state level, national level, or whatever, in games and sports, cultural, science and tech, or any social initiatives that you have taken. Right. Next slide, please. So these are the dimensions.
Vedanth, I would like to add something to the previous slide.
Sure.
So guys, there is no hard and fast rule that, I need to have day one intern, I need to have the top PR, I need to have the top CPI. These are the conventional ways of entering into consulting. Majority of the cases are like that, but then there are also a lot of cases in which the resumes or the profile was not like that. You can refer to the resumes of various seniors that got selected. And so there's absolutely no need to worry if your resume doesn't look like that. I mean, people ask me, I just have 2 peaks. Will my resume get shortlisted? I have just 1 peak, and they invent some sort of high. I have a high in my resume. So don't worry about that. Just make your resume as good as possible, and then whatever the shortlisting committee does, they do, right? So yeah, just wanted to
Yeah,
add that.
and just adding to that point, even in terms of dimensions, right? It's not that if you are weak in one particular dimension, then you are definitely out of the selection process. The important point is to have a very diversified sort of resume. And even if you have a weak part in one of the sections, you can sort of balance it out through the other sections. So yeah, I mean, that was about that in terms of what are the materialistic or the objective things that you can put on your resume. But what are the traits that they look for your resume, right? So as these are the 4 traits: entrepreneurial drive, problem solving, leadership, personal impact, etc. So what Amit mentioned is that the clients come with cases to these consulting firms, and we help them solve those particular problems, right? So it's important to have a sort of an entrepreneurial drive within. Entrepreneurs typically have a very high emphasis on the problem statements, on what are the sort of white spaces that they exist, and are hell bent on solving that particular problem. So you need to have that kind of mindset. Second would be in terms of your actual approach to the problem solving, right? How are you a creative sort of a person? Are you a data driven sort of a person, or are you just taking a backseat in terms of problem solving, right? So second part is that. Third part would probably be the leadership. Are you sort of a lone wolf? Are you approaching the problem alone, or are you involving everyone within your team and solving the problem? And fourth one, like an entrepreneur, do you have a high emphasis on the impact of the problem statement that you're solving? Is your focus on the key metrics that should be looked at while solving the problem? Because ultimately it's a business that is coming to you, right? And the business needs to have some sort of impact that they monitor. So these are the 4 traits that they look for, and that's why I sort of advise juniors to have this framework while portraying any sort of project or POR or work experience, or even these things. Framework that I recommend is the STAR framework. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. STAR is like situation, task, action, and result. So clearly sort of mention or give a context of the problem that you're solving, or was it a complex sort of a problem? Was it a simple problem? So this sets the context in terms of the situation. Then mention the task that you are solving for, right? How, once that you have identified the problem, what are the key steps that you have looked in terms of determining the roadmap that these are the things that I need to do, and then emphasize on the actions that you took. These and in the action space, you can emphasize on your leadership traits, on your teamwork traits, whether what sort of data that you looked at, what are the metrics that you looked at, and finally the results where you can show the impact that you have. So yeah, these were the things that I wanted to mention. Next slide, please. Yeah, and as I said previously, in terms of resume preparation, clearly emphasize the sort of peaks or highs, whatever that you want to call them, in different dimensions that I mentioned earlier: your academics, your experience, professional experience, your extracurricular activities, and your PORs. Clearly mention and don't be how do I put it? Don't be scattered. Have clear sections in your resume in terms of what are the peaks. And as I said previously, you don't need to worry that I have a weak section in any one of these dimensions. You can portray a pretty diversified personality, and it's always better to have sort of two PORs and 2 social administratives instead of like 4 PORs and mentioning some random PORs. Back, reach out to any one of us, any one of the people who have joined any consulting firm, or have even if they have not got selected, been part of the entire selection process. Do get in touch with them and take feedback. So yeah, I think those were the things from my end. Manali, you can take it forward from me.
Yeah, thanks, Vedanth. Can you move to the next slide? So like mainly there are 3 steps in the interview process. The first is like any other interview you've given through SPO or any other platform. You will be asked about you'll be made to introduce yourself, and you will be asked some basic HR questions. The HR questions in more detail will be coming up in the following slides, but things such as where you're based out of and what is your background been so far in IIT Kanpur or otherwise. Those are the questions you can expect at the beginning of the interview. Then you'll slowly move into the actual case study or guesstimate. So this can, in my experience, these have been around 20 to 25 minutes. But I also know of people who had shorter or longer cases. It really depends on what the nature of the case is. So for example, guesstimates can take shorter and maybe a market entry case could take longer. So it depends on the case really. And there is also no fixed time that you should basically aim at solving the case in. But since the interview is tentatively scheduled for 30 to 45 minutes in a regular setup, you can have the 20 to 25 minutes as a time window in your head while preparing. And it's also good that way to prepare with this time frame. Also, so the last part of the interview process is closing questions. So like Vedant said, a lot of your value addition in this particular part of the interview can come from whatever knowledge you've gained about the company or about the kind of problems they cater to through your body process. So this is where you can actually create an impact for yourself and not stick to the regular questions like what has your experience been like. So that is, those questions are important, but what will really make you stand out is like specific things you've heard from your conversations with your buddies. So that this part of the interview is very important in that sense. And the total number of interviews like can vary from 2 to 5. As Vedant said, this year, so the past year there were exceptions where some people had 1 or 2 interviews, but I guess you shouldn't worry about the number of interviews. But one thing to keep in mind is that you need to have a yes in all of the interviews you give. So again, I might be wrong, but what I have seen through my process and other people's process is that if you're giving 4 interviews, then you need to have 4 yeses. So you can't really let yourself loose for a single interview thinking that you'll have more rounds. That was it about this slide. We can move to the next one. So the HR rounds are, so again, in my experience, the HR rounds were taken by senior partners. So these had more of, so again, HR questions and not really case solving. A guesstimate or two were asked, but the main focus of these rounds is for the interviewer to know you about what your ambitions are and what all you've done so far and what you see yourself doing in the future. So I'll go through these and then I'll also add a few points. So you'll be made to introduce yourself, make sure that you cover all facets of your life. You don't, one shouldn't start their journey from IITK. If you have any background in anything relevant before IITK, or even if you don't, it's a good practice to include your pre-IITK life in terms of where you come from, what your maybe family is into and stuff like that. Then obviously you can expect a conversation about like your internships or PORs or whatever experiences you've listed out in your resume or whatever you've given in your introduction. Then like two or three important questions are like why consulting and why the firm that you're interviewing for. So make sure that apart from the standard answers that you train yourself for, you also add some points of your own. So for example, if you're someone who wants to start up sometime down the lane, then why consulting should have an aspect of that in your answer. And why should I hire you should ideally should have parts of your personality and parts of your experiences in the past that should go along with them, and it shouldn't be a standard answer. And make sure you add some points that can be discussed further. So if you leave like a dead end at whatever you say, for example, I want to start up on my own, hence consulting, then they know it's an answer that's rote learned. So like you should be prepared with some context about what you're going to say too. Then biggest failure is, so again, they're very used to hearing drop years and bad academic semesters as answers for what is your biggest failure. So like you can try to think beyond that and actually list out experiences that tell more about you and how you came out of that failure instead of going for the cliche answers. And I'm sure, I mean, like everyone has their own failures, so it won't be hard to come up with something unique. why not us? I think don't have much to say on that, but if you know enough about the firm, you might have an answer for that too. Why not us? Future plans are again very important because they won't want a clueless person or a person who does not have an idea about 5 or 10 years down the lane of how it looks like. Even if you don't have a very clear path, uh, you must have envisioned some things for your immediate career, and that is something that they want to hear about. And so these rounds aren't taken by your typical HRs who are only there to see cultural fit. These are taken by very senior people in the industry, so they would want to like stay connected to you and have them work with them closely. And so you should put a really like you should have a good preparation for these and also be very present while these interviews are happening. And again, they can be anywhere around 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, adding to this, right? I mean, these are pretty tricky questions to have, and that's why instead of giving a cliched answer or a very rote learned answer, that's why the buddy process is important. You can discuss all these answers with your buddy. That what are the things that would make my answer stand out with respect to my peers and make it more contextual for the particular firm that you're interviewing. So, by consulting answer, I mean, you can either give a general answer or you can sort of contextualize it each for Bain, McKinsey, and BCG in terms of the clients that they serve. So, like Bain serves a lot of private equity clients, so you can probably add a bit of financial analysis to your answer. That is something that you're seeking from consulting experience. So, these are the these are the sort of nuances that you can gain from your interactions with your buddies. Amit, you want to add something with respect to McKinsey?
Yeah, I mean, so for Bain and BCG, what I saw was that for me, they just asked my introduction and then a small questions on my introduction, and then they straight away jump to the case. But for McKinsey, they specifically have this 20 to 25 minutes of window in which they grill you with these HR questions. So, for example, this biggest failure was asked to me in McKinsey, which was not asked in the other two firms. And what I would say is for future plans is that you shouldn't worry too much about this. That what you'll be, how you see yourself in 5 or 10 years. Because so no one asked me this question in any of the interviews. I gave around 15 interviews in total, all the three firms. No one asked me what your future plans was. And while preparing for this, do not go into very detail. A general answer would also suffice because no one knows the future. Even we don't, right? um yeah, so for HR you can leave it at the last. First you should focus on preparing for the technical round is what I would say.
So a few things that you can be so once like after your technical rounds where they are pretty much sure about your preparation and your aptitude, that is when the HR rounds actually come into play. So and you'll be cross questioned in these. So I gave like 2 to 3 interviews of this type, and what the common thing about them was they really want to know about you. So, for example, in buy consulting, if you say that you're exposed to a lot of problems in a lot of geographies or a lot of industries, then they might cross question you as to you maybe you just want to travel or you want to have you want to have a job that changes very frequently as compared to a constant one. So I don't know, a lot of questions that you wouldn't expect going into the interview. But yeah, I mean, you should be very you should like really make sure your purpose for giving these interviews and this job is very clear before going in. So we can go to the next slide. So like these are the broad categories of things they look for. In personality and grooming, you can be asked your interests out of um, out of your academics or the things that they directly see on your resume. So questions like what do you do in your free time, or maybe things about how you are with your family, or what do you look for when you start making new connections or start talking to or building your network. So they'll try to see if you're a person who can speak about things other than just your work. So this kind of coincides with the airport test where they try to see indirectly during the interview whether they can be stuck with you at an airport. So the thing is that you should be able to make a conversation, hold a conversation, and be presentable. So what they're trying to see is that you can be a presentable person on behalf of the firm when you're interacting with clients. So personality and grooming and airport test are very, so these pillars are very important, because after all it's a job where you'll be talking to people. So you can't really be, it's not fair to say you can't be introverted, but you should also have a personality that can interact well with people and make connections. Then they'll also evaluate your confidence and calm, because since it's a client facing role, again, you can't really afford to be uh, afford to get panicky or anxious while you come across problems. So try to stay confident and calm, but at the same time you can stay engaged in the problem without taking a back seat suddenly. And then communication skills, I think it's not more about the language, it's about how you communicate. So you should be able to, send across very clearly the points you have in your head, and also ask effective questions. So a lot of your case will depend on asking the right questions, and if you don't frame them well, or if you don't ask them concisely, you will be seen in a negative light. So interview related communication and also networking related communication is something they look for, and not how polished your language is. That too, in a sense, but not much.
Yeah, and
uh,
just adding to that, right, in terms of the personality and grooming section, so this was probably not relevant for our interviews because our interviews are online. But given that these interviews would start happening offline as well, they also look, I mean, consulting firms, especially since it's a client-facing role, they're very particular about the way you look. Is your hair messy? Is your beard messy? Are you dressed well? So these are the things that they look for definitely in offline interviews. So I'm pretty sure that all of you will be dressed well, but this is a thing that they definitely consider. So be be cognizant of that as well. Yeah, Manali,
that
continue.
they can also like prod you as to whether you're feeling tired or not, and
Yeah,
it can be a tricky question. If you say you're tired, then it doesn't really work for you, but if you say you're not tired, then they might think you're very not into the whole interview mood. I don't know, it's a tricky one. We can go to the next slide. Gulam, I think, are you online? Yep. So this is the tentative practice mode roadmap. You start by forming a case group. It can consist of 2 to 3 members. Then you move on to Victor Cheng videos, but then these videos only give an overview of what case solving is and how it happens in traditional consult interviews. This is not really a source where you can pick up technical concepts. Then the basic case books are Case Interview Cracked, and there's also a video playlist on YouTube for the same. There's also a playlist by Aditya Agrawal. So these are the two YouTube playlists you can refer to. They're not listed in this slide. You might want to write them down. And then there's the IIT Madras case book, from which Anshika will discuss a case later. Buddy cases are after you've connected to your buddies. So like Vedanth said, they can be evaluative, but it's also important to show, as in to show how prepared you already are, but also to take in as much advice as possible, because there's always scope for improvement. So depending on where you are in your prep, you would take different things from buddy cases, but all in all, you want to take into account their feedback and work on them. And then for advanced material, you can refer to the IIM Ahmedabad case book and the Wharton and Kellogg case book. But I guess very few people get the time to go through these. So it's fine if you just look at a few cases from these and not be worried about covering them all. And
yeah,
also yeah, go ahead, Vedant.
yeah. I was telling there are a couple of ways to approach these case books, right? Either you can read these case books off, or you can solve the cases with your peers. I would definitely suggest that in the beginning, after watching the video playlist, you can probably go through a couple of cases. I mean, read them through, and then start practicing those cases with your friends. As many cases as you practice, that would be better. And even in terms of frameworks, right? I mean, probably once you watch Victor Cheng, you would be accustomed to the word and introduced to the word of framework. But in terms of framework, I would suggest don't be extremely fluid that देख लेंगे interview में कैसा हो रहा है उसके हिसाब से. And at the other end, don't be super rigid on the sort of framework that you approach while solving these cases. So make your own framework and have a right balance between being rigid and being extremely fluid. This certainly helped me and even Amit in our interviews. So, yeah.
And there's no like fixed number of cases or recommended number of cases you can do. So like I have heard of seniors and friends who've done a lot of cases, like really a lot, 80 to 100 in some cases. And I'm on the lower end. I did like barely 8 to 10 cases. I don't even have a count. But as long as you feel confident about the traditional frameworks, or you feel confident about how you would approach a new case, I think that is where you can shift your focus to more solving than maybe to actual solving of new cases than just practicing the routine cases, which can be similar in some cases. So number is not important. The approach is important. Once you feel confident about your approach, you can try out as many new cases as you want. Also, no, that is all. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I wanted to add something on this. So basically what I have seen is that the amount of cases that practice kind of proportional to the strength of your resume. So I'll explain this. Basically, at the time of preparation, I felt like my resume is kind of on the weaker side. So I thought, how can I make it up? So I practiced a lot of cases, 50 cases, Vedanth, and I practiced. So he gave me 50 cases, I gave him 50 cases. And then I think I read around 30 to 35 cases. So around 130 cases overall. So, I mean, this is just an observation that I saw. You can take it or leave it. It's your choice. Yeah, next slide, please.
So maintain a case journal, or basically have a record of all the cases you've solved on individual sheets or a book or whatever. And so this is an advice that a senior gave me, that at the end of each case you can write down your learnings in 2 or 3 points, so that even if you don't go through the entire case again, you can basically only go through the notes that you've taken in a very short manner as to what you need to work on after that case. So this is very important. You should not let go of a case after it's done. Like you should go back to it in some way or the other. And then form and regularly modify your own frameworks. I think this is more applicable when you solve a lot of cases, that I believe your case solving can be shaped a certain way. And this can happen when you try to experiment with your way of solving cases. And then again, no minimum number of cases to be practiced. Look for your own comfort level. And yeah, so make the best of buddy practice sessions. Like you never know what could come out of it. So as early as you can get started with seniors or the actual buddies later, the better for you. You can go to the next slide. So Anshika will discuss more about the interview preparation from here on.
Thank you, Manali. So, hello everyone. So, first of all, I'll be basically discussing upon ki interview mein kya hota hai, what all is covered there in the typical interview. So, first, once the resume gets shortlisted, you get a buddy allotted. The buddy process is there, and after that, the interview is there. So, interview mein there are 3 major things, as Manali had earlier told. Ki there can be HR questions. There is a proper case interview, and that case interview can be either guess estimates or a case study. And then again, there are some closing questions. So I would be basically focusing upon how do you solve case studies and guess estimates, and what are actually these, and how to approach them. So moving on, next slide. Right. So these are some examples of guess estimates. So usually, just say we have 2 to 3 rounds, or maybe 3 to 5 rounds of case interviews. So initially, in the initial rounds, you usually get guess estimates, because these are simpler, shorter, smaller, like 20 minutes, usually a guess estimates take. So guess estimate is basically they'll give you a problem and they'll ask you to estimate the number. And that can be, these are the examples, like estimate the number of ties sold in Kanpur, estimate the number of vacuum cleaners sold in India in a year, or estimate the number of tennis balls that can fit in a Boeing 747, or it can be anything like estimate the number of tube lights in IIT Kanpur, any random thing, estimate the number of leaves on XYZ tree. So the point is that the final answer, basically here, what matters is how you approach the problem. So Vedanth, Ghulam, can you please move on to the next slide? So during a guess estimate, they are basically looking at your some basic business sense, that very basic. Matlab, you don't need to know बहुत ज़्यादा बड़ी business की terms या फिर a lot of details. A very basic business sense, and how good you are actually dealing with numbers. That is also that they are checking, because usually a guess estimate would be heavy on numbers. So your mathematical calculations and your comfort with dealing with numbers, that is checked. And then there is problem structuring as to how you approach solving a problem. For example, if you are given any problem, and how do you actually approach it. And the last is sanity check. So sanity check is like, for example, say let us take an example and then we'll look into all of these. Say for example, I have been given the guess estimate. He estimate the number of ties sold in Kanpur, the one that was given there. So estimate the number of ties sold in Kanpur in a year. So whenever you start any question, be it a guess estimate or a case study, first of all, you need to confirm if you have understood the question correctly. So I would ask the interviewer again that, in my understanding, you want me to identify the number of ties that are sold in Kanpur in a year. I would just reconfirm, paraphrase the question and confirm from the interviewer, so that we both are on the same page. Matlab, I don't want to mess up solving a wrong problem. So first of all, do make sure that you understand the problem correctly. So clarify the question with the interviewer. Then after that, you would need to understand the scope of the problem. Say for example, if I say, so by ties, do you want me to include the bow ties or just the normal ties? So basically I'm here trying to understand what kind of product they are actually asking me to calculate the number of. Or say for example, what time frame do you want me to consider? So usually in the problem it was already mentioned ki calculate the number of ties that have been sold in Kanpur in 1 year. So I know that the geography that they want me to consider is Kanpur, and the time frame that they want me to consider is 1 year. So these are some basic questions that you need to build upon. So usually what happens is, they say, when I did a lot of cases and guess estimates, so I prepared my own exhaustive list of pre-eliminary questions. So you call these pre-eliminary questions. ये question necessary होते हैं तुम्हारी problem की एक understanding develop करने के लिए, एक तुम्हें एक background, एक picture दिखे सामने की problem है क्या. Because without that picture you cannot approach the problem. Usually in pre-eliminary questions से ही तुम्हारी problem का काफी ज़्यादा तुम्हें idea लग जाता है. So it's important that you ask these pre-eliminary questions and you try to make a list of these pre-eliminary questions. And depending upon क्या तुम्हारा question है, क्या तुम्हारा case है, क्या तुम्हारी guess estimate है, तुम वो relevant pre-eliminary questions पूछ सकते हो. So usually these pre-eliminary questions revolve around geography, the kind of product, the competition, the time frame, and these kind of things. So ये जब तुम cases करोगे या guess estimates करोगे, तो you would eventually keep making this list, adding on this list of preliminary questions. So with practice, you will understand कि कहाँ पे कौन सा question ज़्यादा relevant होता है. Okay, so once I have got a basic understanding, say for example, they tell me कि you only need to estimate the number of ties that are worn, no bow ties. So maybe there can be another question ki, do I include the uniform ties as well? So they can tell me, you included. So now comes ki, how do I approach the problem? So we cannot approach the problem randomly. There needs to be a structure, a proper way to approach it, so that every segment is covered in it. Say for example, in this case only, number of ties sold, I can divide the say for example, I know the total population of Kanpur, for example, let us take an estimate of 10 lakhs. Okay. Matlab, this is a very vague number. So usually in guess estimates, if you are not, you need to know some very basic numbers like the population of India, the rural urban divide and these kind of things. But for example, if you are very clueless on something that is very new to you, so you can ask the interviewer themselves that do we have any data regarding this? So if they would have, they will tell you, else they will tell ki तुम खुद ही estimate करो कानपुर की population क्या है. So that can be another thing. So you don't hesitate to ask, okay, because that is the initial base with which you would be starting. So for example, I get the population of Kanpur and so I can see कि usually ties जो होते हैं वो school जाने वाले बच्चे पहनेंगे, middle age में जो working लोग हैं वो पहनेंगे, old age में there would be very few people who would be wearing the ties. So maybe I can divide the whole population of Kanpur into different age group. Like there can be children, school going children, then there can be people who are working adults, and they can be people who are retired. So I have divided the whole population of Kanpur into 3 parts. Then again, out of these 3 parts, there would be few people who would be very poor, like few children who would not be able to go to school, or few people who would not be doing the white collar jobs that would require them tie. So again, I can divide these 3 groups as per their income, like lower income segment, middle income segment, high income segment. So a table kind of thing has formed, like if you can visualize. So there would be the age groups on one side and the income segments on the other side. So then I would need to put in ki kis segment mein kitna percentage of log ties pehnte honge, and this is how you approach. And then finally you come to a number ki, for example, out of, first of all you assign ki kis segment mein kitni percentage of population hogi. Say for example, kids in the middle income segment, so ye ek percentage assign karna padega. Say for example, I say ki total population 100% है कानपुर की, उसमें से I say 20% बहुत ज़्यादा poor है, then 60% is your middle income, and then 20% is your higher income end. So and then out of that also, say for example, there is like 30% बच्चे हैं, 50% middle age के हैं, and then rest 20% adults हैं. So this way you try to assign these percentages, and whatever numbers I am putting in, at every point you need to make sure you are discussing this with your interviewer. So ये जो case interview होता है, this is not all like, don't approach it as कि ये तुम्हारा test चल रहा है. Think of it as कि you and the interviewer are together trying to solve a problem. So try to discuss your approach with the interviewer at every point. Whatever you are thinking, think it loud. Discuss it with the interviewer. Tell them what you are thinking. What is your approach? How are you thinking to solve the problem? Is it the right way to go? So keep discussing with the interviewer. That is very important. And interviewer will also keep giving you feedback parallelly. Ki, okay, you can do this, you can do this. Basically, the interviewer will drop in hints while they are trying to communicate with you, and you need to catch on those hints. So this is how it usually goes. Okay, so moving on. Gulam, please move on to the next slide. So moving on to the case interviews. So usually there are 4 types of cases: profit loss case, market entry case, merger acquisition case, and unconventional cases. So on the subsequent slide, I'll try to give an example of each of these kind of cases so that you get an idea. Please move on. So yeah, so profit loss case is a very straightforward, typical case that you can expect again in your first, second rounds of interview, because these are usually very easy, straightforward cases. The cases that you can start with, profit loss cases. So for example, the case that has been given is that your client is a petrol pump owner on the Chandigarh-Delhi highway, and of late he has been experiencing a decrease in sales, and he has hired you to figure out what might be wrong. So here you can clearly see that the sales are going down. So the profit loss case is very simple. Either the sales are going down, or the profits are going down, or the costs have increased, or the revenue is going down. Something very straightforward. Look for these keywords. This is a profit loss case. You would be very easily able to identify what is a profit loss case. So this is a, like, basically the client is facing losses. How do you help him out? This is the typical profit loss case. Moving on. Next is a market entry case. Say, for example, the owner of ABC telecom operator is looking to enter the Thailand market. She wants to analyze if this could be a profitable proposition. Again, this is very straightforward that XYZ company wants to enter ABC market. So this is a market entry case example. Please move on. Then this is an unconventional case example that, for example, if you're the president of Students Gymkhana and the director wants you to find possible solutions for the decreasing attendance in the morning lectures. So this is not something that you would probably have practiced before. This is a very unconventional case that you need to approach with your structured thinking. So structured thinking is something that you would develop along the way while solving the cases. So Gulam, please move on to the next slide. So this is a very basic approach, basic 4-step approach to solve the cases. So as I told you earlier, first of all, you need to define the problem. And for defining the problem, first of all, whenever the question is given to you, you just paraphrase the question and confirm from the interviewer if you both are on the same page, if you have understood the problem correctly. That is very important. If in case you don't understand the problem correctly, you have messed up the whole case. So you need to make sure that you have understood the problem correctly. Then second is that you need to ask questions. You need to develop an understanding of the problem. As I said, that there can be different dimensions like product, geography, competitor, and all, using which you need to develop a picture, bigger picture as to what is happening, why the client might be facing this problem. Then once you get an understanding of the problem, you need to structure an approach as to how you will solve the problem. Say, for example, if it is a profit loss case, then you can say like that, okay, if the profits are decreasing, then we know that profits are basically revenue minus cost. So if the profits are decreasing, then it means that either the revenue might be decreasing or either the cost might be increasing, or both of this can be happening parallelly. So you are basically telling the interviewer that this is the approach. So basically we would dig down each of these segments of revenue and cost and figure out where the problem lies. So this is very simple structure, very straightforward structure for a profit loss case. And similarly, there are different structures for different kind of cases. For example, for market entry, there is a different case. And for unconventional cases, there is no framework. You need to develop the framework yourself. And you can do it only once you have practiced a lot of cases, once you have developed that approach to solve the cases in a systematic, structured manner. Then you can also try to solve the unconventional cases. So it's always better to start with profit loss cases because they are very structured already. A typical framework usually is there for profit loss cases. And then you can move on to the market entry cases, and then you can move on to the unconventional cases. So once you have discussed your approach with the interviewer, then you can, and the interviewer approves it, then you can move on to actually solving the case. So for solving the case, you need to dig down each of the branch that you have basically thought of. This is how I would be approaching the case. So you dig down each of the branch and try to get the data from the interviewer, and then you give your analysis based on that data, and you together solve the case. The word here together is important. Just don't keep on doing the calculations yourself. It is important that you communicate with the interviewer at every step. You need to keep on communicating with the interviewer. That is very, very important, because it's like you both are solving it together. So you both are discussing it. So you keep telling the interviewer, okay, this is what I'm thinking, this is how I am approaching, and this is what I have thought of. These are the points that I have concluded. It is very important for you to discuss with the interviewer, because interviewer will keep guiding you. Interviewer wants you to come to a solution because you both are solving it together. So the interviewer wants the problem to get solved. So the interviewer will give you hints, will help you out in solving it. And last, if you have identified the problem, then it is equally important to close the problem, that is synthesize the problem correctly. So for synthesis, it's basically, there is a very very typical approach to synthesize a problem. You tell what your problem is. You tell what actually the what the problem, where the problem lied. For example, if I say the profits were decreasing for the petrol pump owner, and the profits were decreasing because a new highway had been constructed, and then you give your solutions. So my typical synthesis would look like, our client, a petrol pump owner, profits were decreasing, and during the analysis we found out that a new highway had been constructed, because of which the profits were decreasing. So as recommendations to improve the profit, I'll suggest these 3 points, and then you can give on 3 pointers as to how they can improve upon their profits. So this is how you synthesize the case, and synthesis is very important because that is your conclusion, your last impression of the case. So this is a typical, I would say, 4 parts to solving a case. Like first, you define the problem, understand the problem. Second is you make a framework, basically make an approach as to how you will solve the problem. Third is you actually solve the problem, analyze the information. And fourth is you synthesize the case, give the conclusion after the whole, the problem solving. So Ghulam, please move on to the next slide. So let's try to do this example case. Okay. So this is a case that I took from IIT Madras casebook. So the case says that your client is a bicycle manufacturer. Profits over the last 6 months have been down, and you have been called to intervene. So first of all, I would say, for example, I am the one who's getting interviewed, and say, for example, Manali is here, who would be acting as the interviewee in between whenever needed. So once the interviewer interviewer gives me this case that your client is a bicycle manufacturer, profits over the last 6 months have been down, you have been called to intervene. So I'll ask the interviewer that if I understand the problem correctly, my client is a bicycle manufacturer whose profits have been declining for the past 6 months, and we need to identify the reason for the same. Am I right? So this is like, I am trying to confirm if we both are on the same page, if we both understand the problem, if I understand the problem as the interviewer wants me to approach it. So if the interviewer says yes, so then I would need to ask some preliminary questions to build an understanding of the problem. Ghulam, there is a window opened on your screen. Can you please just close it? Great, thanks. So now I would need to ask some preliminary questions so that I'm able to build a bigger picture of this particular problem. So I would like you guys to come up with some preliminary questions. As I told you, the preliminary questions can be around the geography, the product, the timeline, the competitors, the industry, and basically to get a bigger picture of this problem. So you can raise your hand, and then maybe the host can unmute you and you can ask the question. You can throw some random questions. It's okay. Whatever comes to your mind, just throw it out. Then we can discuss what can be the some preliminary questions. Yeah. Ghulam, can you just unmute the people who are raising their hands? Cool. Thanks. Yeah, Yash.
Okay, so my first question will be like, where is the business located?
Good, perfect. So say, for example, the interviewer says that the business is pan-India and ours is a national brand. We sell all across the India. So great. Moving on to the next question. Mahima?
Yeah, so my question would be, say, like, is the product or like the cycle demand is declining, or just it's our company that is facing a loss?
Okay, so basically, I would like to rephrase your question. You are asking, is it only our company for whom the profits have been down, or is it the whole cycle industry for which the profits have been down, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So for example, I say it's only for our company that the profits have been down. Cool. Moving on to the next question, Vidyut.
So it is dependent on the only revenue based, or it is cost based, that the cost, the manufacturing cost is increased.
Right. So this question is not appropriate here. Okay. This question, you would need to ask when you are discussing the approach. Once you tell the approach ki, okay, if the profits are down, then either the revenue can be down or the cost can be increasing. Then you ask the interviewer ki in dono mein se kya ho raha hai, ab mujhe batao. It is not an appropriate preliminary question. You should ask this question during your analysis of the case. Understood?
Yeah.
Just wanted to add one thing to this. So basically here it is clear that it is a profitability case, right? So we know that what next we'll be doing is profit equals revenue minus cost, and then this thing will eventually come up. But like, what if you don't know what framework you're going to follow? So the general idea is, while preliminary questions, you should put yourself in that situation and then think of things that immediately pop into your head. So for example, my client is a bicycle manufacturer. What kind of bicycle does he manufacture, right? So you read the statement and whatever questions come up front, right? You imagine yourself being in that, in the client's office or something. That's the general idea. Anshika, please go on.
Great. So moving on, Akash.
What are our customer segmentation? Like we are targeting for niche market, or we are targeting for the middle ones, or we are just targeting for the lower middle class?
Right. So basically, for example, this question, so this, say the interviewer says, okay, so customer segmentation, basically we have two type of customers. One are the ones who are very adventurous, goes for very sporty bikes. And for them, we have our extreme cycles. And the other ones are the ones who use cycle for their daily use. And for them, we have our normal regular cycles. So this is like through customer segmentation, you also understood the product segmentation, that they are basically selling two type of product for two different type of customers. Okay, great. So yeah, Jitesh, you can also put up your question.
Yes, Anshika. So my first question will be like, it's a pre-established company, or it's kind of like a 2 or 3 year old firm?
Okay. This can be one question, but I feel it is not very much relevant here. So basically, there is a list of, I would say, a list of so many questions that you can, there would be a list of many questions that you can find as preliminary questions. And depending upon what your problem is, you need to fit in the right preliminary questions for that problem, and you will eventually learn it with practice. Okay, there isn't anything right, wrong, or like I would say something that you were expected to know right now. मतलब जब तुम cases करोगे, practice करोगे, तो experience के साथ you would eventually identify कि okay, किस तरह की case problem में किस तरह के preliminary questions पूछे जाते हैं. Okay. So जैसे यहाँ पे who are the competitors in this field and what are their growth rates? So ये इतना ज़्यादा relevant नहीं है, because we have already talked कि मतलब हमें पता है कि हमारे profits decline कर रहे हैं, तो हमने पूछा क्या competitors के भी profit decline कर रहे हैं, वो हम already पूछ चुके हैं, तो उन्होंने बोला नहीं, only our profits are declining. So then we don't need to know about the growth rates of the competitor. Okay, right? Geography we have already discussed initially. It's pan-India. Then is the decrease in sales specific to a certain region? So then the answer to this is that no, it is not. So once you get that hint, na, that ki ये इनके पास दो टाइप की साइकिल्स हैं, एक एक्सट्रीम टाइप की साइकिल है और एक नॉर्मल टाइप की साइकिल है, तो यू गेट देन आइडिया कि अच्छा यहाँ पे प्रोडक्ट सेगमेंटेशन या फिर कस्टमर सेगमेंटेशन होगी. अब पार्थ ने क्वेश्चन बोला, हैव यू चेंज द रॉ मटेरियल वेंडर्स रिसेंटली? सो दिस इज अ वेरी वेग क्वेश्चन, मतलब यू कैन नॉट पुट दिस क्वेश्चन राइट नाउ. अब ऐसे मेरे पास 100 क्वेश्चन आ जाएंगे कि रॉ मटेरियल वेंडर चेंज किया, डिस्ट्रीब्यूटर चेंज किया, साइकिल ही चेंज कर दी, कुछ भी. तो ये हम ऐसे अप्रोच नहीं करेंगे. वी वुड बी अप्रोचिंग ऑल ऑफ दीज क्वेश्चंस इन अ स्ट्रक्चर्ड मैनर. This is what case solving is all about. How do you approach solving a problem in a structured manner? So once, let me move on. Once we have, once I have got an idea कि मैंने preliminary questions पूछ लिए, अब मुझे पता चल गया ओके मेरा क्लाइंट एक साइकिल मैन्युफैक्चरर है, वो दो तरह की साइकिल बनाता है, एक एक्सट्रीम साइकिल, एक नॉर्मल साइकिल. वो पैन इंडिया साइकिल सेल करता है एंड उसके 6 महीने से प्रॉफिट्स डिक्लाइन हो रहे हैं. एंड नाउ वी नीड टू आइडेंटिफाई. There is one important question that you guys have missed, not very relevant for this particular problem. basically, is the coming company selling only through shops, or they selling bikes online? A good question. So basically it is ki hamara business model kya hai, matlab company ka business model kya hai. So how do they actually like, do they buy cycles, do they import cycle from somewhere, do they make them in house, how do they sell it? So you need to know the business model, because अगर तुम्हें business model नहीं पता होगा, say for example अगर वो import कर रहे हैं और मान लो दूसरी कंट्री में वॉर हो गई और तुम इंपोर्ट कर रहे हो, तो ऑटोमेटिकली दैट इज रिलेटेड। और लेकिन अगर तुम्हें पता ही नहीं होगा कि वो इंपोर्ट कर रहे हैं, तो तुम कभी इस चीज तक पहुंच ही नहीं पाओगे कि दूसरी कंट्री में वॉर हुई है, इसकी वजह से उनके प्रॉफिट्स अफेक्ट हो रहे हैं। तो यू नीड टू नो द बिजनेस मॉडल ऑफ दैट कंपनी। सो आई टेल की मतलब इनका बिजनेस मॉडल ये है कि ये अपने खुद के इंडिया में बनाते हैं अपनी साइकिल्स, एंड देन दे सेल इट थ्रू टू टाइप ऑफ स्टोर्स। वन इज देयर ओन स्टोर्स, जो इनकी खुद की स्टोर्स है, एंड अदर इज थ्रू नॉर्मल साइकिल रिटेल स्टोर्स। तो ये दो चैनल्स के थ्रू ये सेल करते हैं, एंड बहुत सारी इनकी मार्केटिंग एड कैंपेन्स चलती रहती हैं थ्रू विच ये अपने प्रोडक्ट्स को प्रमोट करते हैं। ओके, सो ये हमारे पास एक बेसिक पिक्चर तैयार हो गई थ्रू द प्रीलिमिनरी क्वेश्चंस। नाउ लेट्स मूव ऑन टू कि अब मैं केस को अप्रोच कैसे करूंगी, हाउ वुड आई बेसिकली अप्रोच द प्रॉब्लम, हाउ वुड आई बेसिकली ले आउट अ फ्रेमवर्क टू सॉल्व दिस केस। So what I would do is I would tell my interviewer ki okay, give me a few seconds to structure my approach, and then I'll get back to you. And during that time that I get, उस टाइम पे मैं अपने पेन पेपर पे एक बेसिकली एक वो बना लूंगी, एक ट्री टाइप बना लूंगी कि आई नो प्रॉफिट्स इज इक्वल टू रेवेन्यू माइनस कॉस्ट। एंड अगर प्रॉफिट्स डिक्रीज हो रहे हैं तो या तो रेवेन्यू डिक्रीज हो रहा होगा या कॉस्ट इंक्रीज हो रहे होंगे। एंड रेवेन्यू, अब मुझे पता है दो टाइप के प्रोडक्ट्स हैं, तो रेवेन्यू इज बेसिकली रेवेन्यू जो मेरा एक्सट्रीम साइकिल से आ रहा है, एंड रेवेन्यू जो मेरा नॉर्मल साइकिल से आ रहा है। और रेवेन्यू फर्दर इसके रेवेन्यू को मैं ब्रेक कर सकती हूँ कि पर आइटम कॉस्ट कितनी है, कॉस्ट पर सॉरी प्राइस पर यूनिट और नंबर ऑफ यूनिट्स दैट आर बीइंग सोल्ड। तो प्राइस पर यूनिट हो गया एंड नंबर ऑफ यूनिट्स दैट आर बीइंग सोल्ड। एंड कॉस्ट को मैं ब्रेक डाउन कर सकती हूँ फिक्स्ड कॉस्ट और वेरिएबल कॉस्ट में। तो ये बेसिकली आई विल शो यू, मतलब ये मैंने एक सिंपल सा एक ट्री टाइप बना लिया, not really sure if you can see, but मतलब this is your profits, these are revenue, these are cost को further divide कर लिया, revenue को divide कर लिया। So ये broadly ऐसे करके तुम अपनी कॉपी में एक ट्री बना लोगे और फिर तुम इंटरव्यूअर से डिस्कस करना स्टार्ट करोगे, उन्हें बताओगे कि सो आई हैव प्लान टू अप्रोच द प्रॉब्लम इन अ वे कि फर्स्ट वील try to find either the revenue is increasing, either the revenue is decreasing or cost is increasing, or both of it is happening. Then we'll, depending upon what of them is being affected, we'll dig down further. So for example, the interviewer says ki revenues have also decreased by 20% and the cost have increased by 5%. So now you know कि अच्छा okay, अब मुझे पता दोनों इफेक्ट हो रहे हैं, रेवेन्यू मेरे डिक्रीज हो गए और कॉस्ट मेरी इंक्रीज हो गई, लेकिन रेवेन्यू मेरा 20% से डिक्रीज हुआ है, कॉस्ट मेरी 5% से इंक्रीज हुई है। सो जो ज्यादा मार्जिन से इफेक्ट हो रहा है पहले उसको एनालाइज करते हैं। तो ठीक है, मेरी कॉस्ट मेरे रेवेन्यू 20% से डिक्रीज हुए हैं, तो ठीक है तुम बोलोगे लेट्स एनालाइज द रेवेन्यूज। अब रेवेन्यूज में मैंने रेवेन्यू को ब्रेक डाउन किया, रेवेन्यू फ्रॉम एक्सट्रीम साइकिल एंड रेवेन्यू फ्रॉम नॉर्मल साइकिल। तो अब मैं इंटरव्यूअर से बोलूंगी कि कैन यू प्लीज शेयर सम डेटा as to what are the revenues that we are getting from extreme cycle and normal cycle, what are the profit percentages, and how has the sale of both these cycles affected during the past 6 months. So now interviewer knows okay, I am hitting on the right questions कि अच्छा ये सही सवाल पूछ रहे हैं कि कैसे इनकी सेल चेंज हुई है, कैसे प्रॉफिट मार्जिन में तो कोई चेंज नहीं आया, या फिर कितनी परसेंटेज दोनों की सेल हो रही है। तो इसके लिए फॉर एग्जाम्पल द इंटरव्यूअर गिव्स मी दिस पर्टिकुलर डेटा। I'll share an image in the chat, so using that image you will get an idea.
So a couple of technical terms over here. I mean, I don't want to bore you out, but Anshika ne jo kiya, there are a couple of terms that I would like to mention. First is MICI, which is called as mutually exclusive, cumulatively exhaustive. मतलब तुम basically जब भी issue tree बनाते हो, everything should be independent of each other, all the branches, and cumulatively all those branches should cover all the aspects of the chain that you want to cover. So this is something that you need to be very cognizant of while solving any cases, that any of the branches should not have overlap with the other branch, and all the branches together should be complete. That's number one. And number two that Anshika did also in this case was the 80-20 rule. So 80-20 rule is again, the gist is that 80% of the problem comes from 20% of the items. 80% of the problems comes from the 20% of the items. So the gist here is to tackle the most important branches out of the entirety. Otherwise, तुम सारी चीजें करने जाओगे, the case is only for 30 to 35 minutes. You won't be able to cover everything. You need to focus only on the important parts. So yeah, Anshika, please.
Perfect. Thanks, Vedanth, for adding these points. So both of the points that Vedanth mentioned were very important. That first, you need to have a MICI approach. So MICI approach के बारे में पढ़ लेना Google करके. MICI approach important है because that is how you would be structuring your cases. So that is one thing, and 80-20 rule. So let's move on with the case solving. So मैंने अभी interviewer से पूछा था कि हमारी जो दोनों टाइप की साइकिल्स हैं, स्पोर्ट्स एक्सट्रीम और जो नॉर्मल वाली साइकिल है, उनकी सेल्स में कैसे चेंज आया है या फिर उनके प्रॉफिट मार्जिन्स में क्या चेंज आया है, पास्ट 6 मंथ्स में क्या चेंज हुआ है. So I asked this question to the interviewer. So let me ask it very properly. Ki how would I be actually asking it in an interview? So I would say ki okay. So I understand that my revenue is coming from two sources. One is through selling the extreme cycle, and other is through selling the normal cycles. So I would like to understand what percentage of revenue each of these compose, and how has the sale of both of these cycles changed over the past 6 months. So this is how I would frame my question. Okay. And then say the interviewer says, okay, I'll give you this data. And I have sent one image to you on the Zoom chat. So you guys can have a look at it. And now after looking at this image, just tell me ki, what are the observations that you can make out of this? Matlab, what are some key observations after looking at this data table that you can think of? You can raise your hands, and then you would be allowed to unmute. So are you guys able to access the image? Cool. So you have a look at it, and then look at the data, the numbers that are given there, and then you give me simple facts that you can, simple observations that you can make out after looking at this data. Just very simple, direct, straightforward observations, what you can see. Just tell me that. You raise your hand, and you would be allowed to unmute. But it's okay, madam, just say, it's there in the Zoom chat. Okay, let me resend it once again. So it's not a link, it's a proper image. You can download it. Have you found it now? Zoom chat. Yeah, so basically decrease in sales of Cycle Supreme. Yeah, right. Good observation. I shared it. Wait, I'll share it to you. I am not able to share the screen. Gulam, I'll share the image to you. You can share it on the screen now. Gulam, can you please share the image that I shared with you just now? Yeah, so I hope now the image is visible to everyone. Now you can simply raise your hands and give me your straightforward plain observations, nothing else, मतलब nothing technical, बस इस data को देख के क्या दिख रहा है वो चीज बताओ.
May I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so here you can see that the sport extreme cycles are sold in few small numbers and giving them more margin in the profits. So we have to consider first to see whether the problem is in the first segmentation of a sport extreme. Then we will go after the cycle supreme.
Okay, तुम बोल रहे हो कि उसका profit margin ज़्यादा है, तो पहले sports
I mean the number of units sold is less and the margin is high, so it's easy to check on this sector where the problem is.
Okay, अब तुम एक चीज logically देखो कि sports extreme की जो units sell हुई हैं 2014 में और 2015 में, वो actually में sports extreme की जो sale है वो increase हुई है, लेकिन in spite of sports extreme की sale increase होने के तुम्हारे profits down गए हैं.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
So the problem might be somewhere else, right? मतलब others, मतलब बाकी लोग भी अपने opinions दो यार. मतलब it's okay यार, मतलब जो तुम्हारे दिमाग में आ रहा है तुम बोलो. मतलब it's important that you share. मतलब तुम्हें तभी idea लगेगा कि case कैसे solve करते हैं. So simply raise your hands and whatever observation is coming to your mind you can share. One is observation कि sports extreme का profit margin cycle supreme के profit margin से ज़्यादा है. Other
one question, the profit margin is the rate of change of profit margin or किसी particular year का change?
नहीं, profit margin is basically कि मुझे मान लो एक साइकिल मैंने बनाई 100 रुपए की और वही साइकिल मैंने जब सेल करी तो मैंने 120 रुपए की बेची, तो इसमें मेरा 20 रुपए का प्रॉफिट मार्जिन हो गया.
से 2015 का डेटा है जो,
हाँ, प्रॉफिट मार्जिन हैज रिमेन्ड कांस्टेंट, मतलब मेरी कॉस्ट बनाने की और जितने पे मैंने सेल किया है वो मतलब जो वो है रेशियो है प्रॉफिट का वो सेम रहा है. एक सेकेंड. हाँ, so can I ask the reason of decrement of sales in cycle supreme? Right. अब तुम ये रीजन डायरेक्टली नहीं पूछ सकते. अब तुमने ये पकड़ लिया है कि ठीक है साइकिल सुप्रीम की जो सेल्स है वो डिक्रीज हो गई है. गुड, मतलब ये एक ऑब्जर्वेशन आई है कि ऊपर भी किसी ने पॉइंट आउट किया था, आई मिस्ड इट आउट. हाँ, सुधांशु ने बोला था, निखिल ने बोला, विद्युत ने बोला कि साइकिल सुप्रीम की जो सेल्स है वो डिक्रीज हो गई है. वी नो, वी कैन सी दिस. यश, वुड यू लाइक टू ऐड एनीथिंग एल्स अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस?
So I was just mentioning that the percentage of cycle supreme sales decrease is quite significant. It is from 20% or between 25 to 30%.
Perfect. So now we can clearly see कि cycle supreme की sales decrease हो गई है and sports extreme की increase हो गई है. So अब problem लाई करती है कहीं ना कहीं कि cycle supreme की sales decrease हुई है, उसकी वजह से profit down हुए हैं. ये तो हमें clearly समझ आ रहा है इस data को देख के. लेकिन साइकिल सुप्रीम की सेल क्यों डिक्रीज हुई है ये तुम फिगर आउट करोगे तुम्हारे एनालिसिस में. तुम इंटरव्यूअर से नहीं पूछ सकते कि बताओ क्यों डिक्रीज हुई है, इसीलिए तो तुम्हें बुलाया गया है कि क्यों डिक्रीज हुई है. तो अब डिक्रीज क्यों हुई है, अब इसके बहुत सारे तरीके होते हैं अप्रोच करने के. सबका मतलब तुम जब केसेस सॉल्व करोगे तो यू वुड आइडेंटिफाई डिफरेंट वेज ऑफ सॉल्विंग द प्रॉब्लम्स एंड यू नीड टू फाइंड द वे दैट सूट्स यू द बेस्ट, या फिर मतलब कौन से सिचुएशन में कौन सा तरीका बेस्ट तरीके से अप्लाई होता है. तो तुम जब केसेस करोगे वो विद एक्सपीरियंस ओनली यू वुड बी एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड. तो इसीलिए इट्स इंपॉर्टेंट दैट यू डू केसेस इन दैट मच क्वांटिटी दैट मेक्स यू फील कंफर्टेबल कि हाँ ठीक है अब मुझे आइडिया है कि ऐसे ऐसे होता है. जब तक तुम्हारी वो या सो मूविंग ऑन, लेट मी से कि साइकिल सुप्रीम की सेल्स डिक्रीज हो गई है. तो I can just ask the interviewer, okay, so I can see कि I'll tell the interviewer जो तुमने मुझे facts बताए, I'll first tell those facts to the interviewer. Okay, तो I'll tell कि मैं कैसे बोलूँगी interviewer को. I'll say, okay, so looking at this data, I can say we can clearly see that the profit margin of sports extreme is higher than that of cycle supreme. And also the sales of sports extreme have increased in the past year, but we can clearly see that the sales of Cycle Supreme have decreased drastically, and thus this implies that the decrease in profits, basically the decrease in revenue, is coming from the decrease in the number of quantity of cycles that are being sold for Cycle Supreme. So I would like to understand why there is a decrease in the quantity of Cycle Supreme sales. So there can be two reasons for it. Either the customers are not demanding Cycle Supreme, or other is that we are not able to manufacture as per what the demand is. So either this could be a demand side problem or this could be a supply side problem. ठीक है? तो उसको ऐसे नहीं बोलना explicitly कि demand side supply side. You say it more naturally. मतलब डिमांड साइड सप्लाई साइड तो एक बहुत ही रटा रटाया फ्रेमवर्क हो गया. यू सेड कि या तो हम नहीं बना पा रहे उतनी साइकिल जितनी डिमांड हो रही है, या फिर जितनी साइकिल मतलब या फिर लोगों ने डिमांड करनी कम कर दी है. तो then you ask कि what of either of these two which is happening? Is it the people who are not demanding Cycle Supreme, or is it we are not able to manufacture Cycle Supreme? So for example, the interviewer says कि it is basically the people who have started demanding less of Cycle Supreme. We are not limited on our production capacity. We are able to supply whatever the demand is. मैंने कहा okay cool. Now I understand कि customers ही Cycle Supreme नहीं खरीद रहे हैं. अब what can be the reason for this? अब वो जो सारे random questions तुम pop out कर रहे थे कि ये चेंज हो गया वो चेंज हो गया, तो अब इसको स्ट्रक्चर्ड तरीके से अप्रोच करो. कस्टमर्स साइकिल सुप्रीम डिमांड नहीं कर रहे, तो कि कस्टमर को हम अटकर प्रोडक्ट एक्सेसिबिलिटी करते हैं, कस्टमर अट्रैक्शन, फिर हमारा प्रोडक्ट ही खराब है, हम साइकिल ही हमारी अच्छी नहीं है तो इसलिए कस्टमर डिमांड नहीं कर रहे. और तीसरा कैन भी कि हमारी साइकिल की जो आफ्टर सेल सर्विसेज हैं या कस्टमर रिटेंशन के लिए जो चीजें हैं वो अच्छी नहीं है, मतलब कस्टमर्स आर नॉट हैप्पी विद आवर आफ्टर सेल सर्विसेज एंड दस दे आर लीविंग बाइंग आवर साइकिल. तो ये तीन डोमेन्स हो गए.
Sorry to interrupt, your voice got cut down, so you will need to repeat the last sentence.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Amit, for pointing this out. So I was saying कि हमें पता है कि हमारी साइकिल्स कस्टमर डिमांड नहीं कर रहे. अब कस्टमर डिमांड नहीं कर रहे, इसका ये रीजन हो सकता है कि हम कस्टमर्स को अट्रैक्ट नहीं कर पा रहे. बाय अट्रैक्शन आई मीन कि हम अच्छे से मार्केट नहीं कर पा रहे, हमारे डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन चैनल प्रॉपर नहीं है. सेकंड ये हो सकता है कि हमारी साइकिल ही अच्छी नहीं है, मतलब आवर प्रोडक्ट इज फ्लॉड, तो दैट इज द cycle is problematic, like the product value proposition of the product is not right. And third is कि हमारी जो आफ्टर सेल सर्विसेज हैं वो अच्छी नहीं है, जिसकी वजह से कस्टमर्स हम रिटेन नहीं कर पा रहे. तो ये तीन हमारे मेजर वो हो गए. मीसी सेगमेंटेशन हो गया, जो वेदांत ने पॉइंट आउट किया था ना, मीसी सेगमेंटेशन, कि मैंने सारे रीजंस को म्यूचुअली एक्सक्लूसिव और एग्जॉस्टिव सेगमेंट्स में बांट दिया कि या तो कस्टमर अट्रैक्ट नहीं हो रहा, या प्रोडक्ट खराब है, या कस्टमर की आफ्टर सेल सर्विसेज जो हम प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं वो अच्छी नहीं है. तो ये तीन डोमेन हो गए, इसके अंडर मेरा सारा सब कुछ कवर हो जाएगा. अब कस्टमर अट्रैक्ट करने के क्या क्या तरीके हैं? हमारी मार्केटिंग हो गई, हमारे डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन चैनल्स हो गए. वैल्यू प्रोपोजिशन में क्या है? साइकिल में क्या क्या होता है? साइकिल की से रबर टायर्स की क्वालिटी, ब्रेक क्वालिटी, उसकी साइकिल की क्या लाइफ है, कितने साल तक चलती है, या फिर अपीयरेंस कैसी है साइकिल की, किस कलर्स में अवेलेबल है, वेट कितना है, क्वालिटी कैसी है, ये सारी चीजें उसकी प्रोडक्ट की वैल्यू प्रोपोजिशन में आ गई, जो उस पर्टिकुलर प्रोडक्ट से रिलेटेड है कि क्या ईज है उसकी, गियर वाली है नहीं है, इस तरह की चीजें. और जो थर्ड वाला सेगमेंट है मेरा कस्टमर रिटेंशन का, तो मैं आफ्टर सेल सर्विसेज, लाइक मैं वारंटी प्रोवाइड करती हूँ नहीं प्रोवाइड करती, मेरे सर्विस सेंटर्स, साइकिल रिपेयरिंग के सेंटर्स इजीली अवेलेबल है, मेरी साइकिल इजीली रिपेयरेबल है, या फिर मेरी आफ्टर सेल्स पॉलिसीज कस्टमर्स फ्रेंडली है या नहीं है. तो ये मेरे ब्रॉड वो हो गए, डिविजन्स हो गए. अब मैं एक एक डिवीजन पे डिस्कस करूंगी अपने इंटरव्यूअर के साथ. सो लेट मी फ्रेम माई सेल्फ कि मैं इंटरव्यूअर को कैसे बोलूंगी. Okay, so now we have understood that it is the demand side problem that people are not demanding Cycle Supreme. So either it could be because of these three reasons: either we don't have a proper customer attraction is decreasing, or the product itself is flawed, or third is that the customer retention is poor. So I would like to understand, I would like to dig down each of these streams one by one, and you can point out where the problem lies. So for example, let's start by customer attraction. So I would like to understand, have we done any changes in our marketing strategies in the past few months? So this is a very to the point, straightforward, direct question. अब मैं मतलब एक एक करके पूछूंगी कि मार्केटिंग में कोई चेंज किया, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन चैनल में कोई चेंज किया, साइकिल की क्वालिटी में कोई चेंज किया, कलर्स में कोई चेंज किया, प्रोडक्ट में कोई चेंज किया, किसी साइकिल के बेसिकली साइकिल में कोई चेंज किया, या फिर वारंटी सर्विसेज में कोई चेंज किया, बिकॉज कुछ चेंज हुआ होगा तभी ये सेल्स डिक्रीज हुई है. तो जब मैंने पूछा कि हैव यू डन एनी चेंजेस इन द मार्केटिंग स्ट्रेटेजी, तो दे टेल me ki, okay, we basically launched an ad campaign very recently, and that ad campaign talked about ki how sporty we are, how adventurous we are, and because of that ad campaign our sales of this sports extreme cycle boosted. So they told this. Okay, now it clicks to you ki okay, क्योंकि उन्होंने एड कैंपेन लॉन्च किया, इसकी वजह से हो सकता है इनकी कंपनी की इमेज जो है वो ऐसी प्रोजेक्ट हो गई हो कि basically they are very adventurous, they are sporty cycle manufacturer, and जो लोग normal cycle purchase करना चाहते थे, they have stopped purchasing the cycle from this company and shifted to their competitors. So this is the problem you have identified. Now you need to convey this to your interviewer and give your suggestions कि कैसे इसको improve कर सकते हैं. तो I am leaving the cost वाला part because मतलब थोड़ा lengthy हो रहा है. So that we can discuss, मतलब that you can go through the case. So simply now let me say कि अब इस केस को close कैसे करेंगे. Now I know कि revenue में problem थी, revenue में हमें पता चल गया marketing campaign उनकी थी जिसकी वजह से problem आई, and अब मुझे solution देना होगा उनको. तो अब मैं क्या करूंगी, मतलब typical way synthesize करने का क्या है, पहले एक line में problem बता दो, दूसरी लाइन में बता दो एक्चुअल वो प्रॉब्लम किस रीजन की वजह से थी, और फिर उसके बाद उसके सोल्यूशन दे दो. तो दिस इज हाउ आई विल टेल टू माय इंटरव्यूअर कि ओके, सो नाउ our client was a cycle manufacturer who was facing a decrease in the profits, and after doing the analysis we found out that it was the recently launched marketing campaign for sports cycle extreme that led to the decrease in the sales of normal cycle, and because of which the profits decrease. So as a recommendation, I would like to suggest to a client that they launch new marketing campaigns that are focused on selling of cliche normal cycles, so that the cycle sales for those can get boosted up. Second, they can collaborate with schools and universities in their college fest, and मतलब basically अब तुम 3 suggestions दे सकते हो, and you can be as creative as possible in these 3 suggestions. For example, एक तो हो गया कि तुम marketing campaign launch करो इनके लिए नॉर्मल साइकिल के लिए, दूसरा ये हो गया फेस्ट वगैरह में जाके स्पॉन्सरशिप कर दो, वहां पे मार्केटिंग कर लो, क्योंकि बेसिकली स्कूल कॉलेज के स्टूडेंट्स तुम्हारी साइकिल खरीदना प्रेफर करेंगे, और तीसरा कुछ और तुम और सोच सकते हो जिससे तुम मतलब दैट कैन हेल्प यू इन बूस्टिंग द सेल्स ऑफ दिस पर्टिकुलर टाइप ऑफ साइकिल, कि मे बी तुम्हारी जो स्पोर्ट्स एक्सट्रीम वाली है उनकी मार्केटिंग तुम अपने राइट सेगमेंट में करो, बेसिकली एडवेंचर ग्रुप्स वगैरह में जहाँ पे वो वाले टाइप के लोग हों. तो this is how you close it. So with this I would like to close the case, and this is how a typical case is solved. So I hope मतलब इससे तुम्हें थोड़ा आइडिया लग गया होगा, ठीक है, कि कैसे से केस को सॉल्व करते हैं. तो this was a very straightforward प्रॉफिटेबिलिटी केस, ठीक है. अब मार्केट एंट्री को सॉल्व करने का एक डिफरेंट तरीका होता है, अनकन्वेंशनल को सॉल्व करने का कोई तरीका नहीं होता, वो तुम्हारी थिंकिंग तुम ग्रेजुअली डेवलप करोगे एंड उसके बाद तुम अनकन्वेंशनल केसेस सॉल्व कर पाओगे. तो मतलब दिस इज हाउ यू अप्रोच केस सॉल्विंग. मतलब तुम केसेस पढ़ना मत, मतलब तुम इनिशियली 1-2 केस पढ़ लिया आइडिया लेने के लिए, आइडिया लग गया, तुम इवेंचुअली केस सॉल्विंग में एक्सपर्टीज केस सॉल्व करके ही हासिल कर पाओगे. लाइक भाई सबका थोड़ा डिफरेंट होता है. सो फॉर मी इट टुक 40-50 केसेस टू गेट कंफर्टेबल विद केस सॉल्विंग. तो मतलब एज पॉइंटेड आउट अर्लियर, तुम मतलब विक्टर चैंग के वीडियोस देख के उसके बाद तुम डायरेक्ट IIT बॉम्बे की केस बुक पे मूव कर सकते हो, और केसेस ना अपने फ्रेंड्स के साथ सॉल्व करो, एक बंदा इंटरव्यूअर बनो, एक बंदा इंटरव्यूई बनो, एंड आपस में एक दूसरे को केसेस करवाओ, rather than reading through the cases. Reading cases will not help you out. मतलब you need to solve the case, you need to think. और तुम्हें पता चल गया, तुम्हें हर पॉइंट पे इंटरव्यूअर के साथ डिस्कस करना है. थिंक लाउड. ऐसा नहीं कि अपने दिमाग में अपनी कॉपी में केस सॉल्व करके रख दिया. That will not help you. You need to discuss it loud with your interviewer. That is very important. You need to solve it together with the interviewer. तो अच्छे से communicate करो अपने ideas को, मतलब be simple in your communication. That is important. मतलब जो भी तुम सोच रहे हो वो तुम अच्छे से communicate कर पाने होने चाहिए. मतलब don't sound confused or perplexed. मतलब take your time. मतलब अगर तुम्हें लग रहा है कि तुम confused हो रहे हो, समझ नहीं आ रहा, तो take your time. Say कि okay, I need 30 seconds to think upon it. Please give me some time. I'll get back to you. उसके बाद सोचो. अगर तुम्हें उसके बाद भी कुछ समझ नहीं आ रहा है तो फिर अपने इंटरव्यूअर को बोलो कि okay, so I was trying to approach the problem this way, but I'm stuck here currently and I'm not able to go forward. Can you please help me out as to how to approach this from here? So मतलब this is how you need to approach मतलब एक केस इंटरव्यू को. मतलब इसको एक कोलैबोरेटिव केस सॉल्विंग जर्नी समझ के सॉल्व करो, मतलब और अच्छे से प्रैक्टिस करो केसेस की. दैट ओनली विल हेल्प यू. ठीक है. एंड इन द लास्ट, मतलब दिस इज द स्लाइड वेयर वी ट्राई टू कंपाइल सम रिसोर्सेज. ठीक है, कि फर्स्ट यू हैव अ लुक एट द विक्टर चैंग प्लेलिस्ट, देन द बॉम्बे केस बुक, and then this is a folder that contains other case books and guest estimate books, and you can use it for your preparation. So cool. Then let's move on to the questions. So now yeah.
Hey Anshika, I just wanted to add one thing in the
Sure.
resource section. So there were a few playlists that we found very, very useful. I am sharing the link. Due to lack of time, we were not able to incorporate them in the resources. So I'm sharing it in the chat section. So the first one is a playlist by this guy called Aditya Agarwal. He's currently in McKinsey, and he gave this talk in some college. Very nice playlist. And the other one is, it's kind of old. So the book that was written, the IIT Bombay case book, the guy who wrote this book actually gave a talk just like we are giving right now in some other college. So the second playlist is regarding that. So these two playlists you'll find very useful.
So and the second playlist also has, apart from, I mean, the theories, they also have one-on-one case interviews, I think 20-minute videos, right? So it will, before you start practicing, it will give you an idea on how to practice with your friends or mates anymore. So that is also something that me and Amit both found very useful.
Great. So we'll add these links in the slides itself so that you have them accessible easily. Okay. Now you guys can ask questions. Matlab, let the floor be open, and we are here. Feel free to raise your hand and ask your questions by unmuting yourself, or you can put your questions in the chat as well. Either way.
Can we get a rough idea of the comparative analysis of the three big MBBs? Like why, and one more thing, that why McKinsey generally do not come in IIT Kanpur, and how can we, increase the hiring of McKinsey from IIT Kanpur?
Okay, that's a bit controversial question because I'll take this one. So I don't think so each of us had our reasons to join our respective firms, but none of us have actually joined the firms, right? So we can't be we are not in a position to actually give you an answer about the specifics. And about McKinsey, Amit, you want to take this up?
I'm not aware of this stat. Can you please repeat? McKinsey doesn't hire from IIT Kanpur, you're saying?
No, the number of students, who are hired in McKinsey are way less than the number of students who are hired in Bain and BCG.
Bain and BCG. So you're referring to the last year statistics, right? Or are you referring to before that as well?
In general.
In general. So the last year, the specific reason was that Bain and BCG came before McKinsey, and that's why a lot of good candidates had already joined those firms. That's why last year the hiring was less. Before that, I mean, Bain took 2 people, BCG took 2 people, and McKinsey took 3 people. if I'm right, like
Yeah.
Vatsalya, Tushar, and Mudit, right? So 3 people in McKinsey, 2 in Bain, and I think 2 in BCG, right, Vedanth? That year.
Yeah.
And before that, I mean, so things are changing, right? I mean, it all depends on what is the requirement, how many people the firm needs. It's not a hard and fast that, McKinsey is the best. That's why it hires very less people. There is no such thing like that. All 3 firms are equally resourceful. They'll provide you with equal opportunities. Just that the firms are strong in few of the practices, like Bain, as Vedanth said, is strong in private equity. BCG is more in social sector. McKinsey also has its USP. So that's the thing, there's nothing like that for McKinsey.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to this, right? In terms of, if you want to compare, I would probably suggest people who have been in the firm for 2 to 3 years, talk to them and try to get an understanding on what sort of clients they serve, what are the majority of the projects that they get. Try to get understanding of the culture, of the personalities of the people over there, what are the sort of career trajectories that they have both inside that respective consulting firm and once they leave that consulting firm. So these are the few things that you will you need to have a conversation with people in those firms and get an idea, and from your own sort of benchmarks or metrics that you want to, that are important to you.
Yeah. Is there any other difference between the 3 MBBs? Any difference you can, in work culture or in general?
I think better people to answer this would be the people who are actually working there, because we too are yet to join. So yeah.
Okay.
I think sure. Sorry.
Yeah. It's not about MBB. The thing is that in tier 2 consulting firm. So my question is that in big firm like MBB, so there's some time period that you have to do some training part, then you go with the action in the consulting part. And is same for all tier 2 companies as well? Like if you are targeting for tier 2 companies, so I mean, what are the differences like in the culture work profile in MBB and tier 2 companies?
So most of these firms have a dedicated training process. So as far as the training question is asked, I think it should be although even other consulting firms have a training process before they actually put you on the live case. And in terms of differences, I mean, what I would suggest is that most of these firms follow a similar sort of interview process in terms of the cases that they ask, but sometimes the work when you get over there is not a client facing role. It's more of a back end of work as well. So what I'd suggest before applying blindly to any consulting firm thinking that it's a client facing role, just ask the people who work there whether what sort of work they are doing currently, whether they're actually doing client facing work or whether they're doing back end work. So depending on your interest, you can probably choose whether you like the client facing one or the back end work. So yeah, make sure that you do that. Anything else? I mean,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Kritat, I think in a pre-deal, the work is due diligence. We help them conduct due diligence.
Hello. Yeah, I had a question that I learned somewhere that the interview process in McKinsey and interview process in Bain and BCG are somewhat different. That in McKinsey they are more like interviewer-led case, and in Bain and BCG there is interviewee-led case. So they more or less depends on interviewing more. So is this correct or?
I think I'll be able to answer it the best.
There is some
So
difference
basically,
in the hiring process as well.
Sorry, what? I didn't understand.
I think there is slight difference in the hiring process as well in the 3 MBBs, right?
Yeah, there's a slight difference in the hiring process, but first I'll answer Vidyut's question. So basically, the thing that you read probably from the internet, it is true, but for our process of hiring in the undergrad level, there is no difference as such. You can practice in a similar way for all the 3 firms. There is absolutely no difference. It's not
Okay,
that for McKinsey I have to practice in a different sense, nothing like that. Sorry, Gulam, can you please repeat your question?
No, I was just asking that, is there any major difference in the hiring process?
Yeah, so the simplest process is that of Bain's. You resume shortlisting followed by an interview. For BCG, one more step is there, the buddy interview, right? So resume shortlist, a buddy interview, then a few days, then the final interview. For McKinsey, again 3 steps: resume shortlist, then a short aptitude test, and then the final interviews. This is the difference. I mean, no need to focus on it right now, but when it comes, it comes.
मतलब भाई अभी तो you guys focus on making a good resume first thing, अच्छे resumes बनाओ, अच्छे से review करवाओ, ठीक है, and second thing case practice. So अभी इस चीज पे focus करो. Once जब shortlist आनी start हो जाए या companies आनी start हो जाए, then you start talking to seniors जो particularly उन companies में काम कर रहे हैं for getting to know उस particular company का process. अभी broadly तो तीनों companies के लिए same resume मतलब similar resume जाएगा, तो resume अच्छा बनाओ अपना, उस पे focus रखो. resume के जो pointers PPT में बताए थे उनको दिमाग में रख के अपना अच्छे से resume present करो. मतलब मुझे काफी लोग बोलते हैं कि भाई मतलब ये चीज अमित ने इनिशियली बोली थी कि 3 पीक्स हैं या नहीं है, हमारा शॉर्टलिस्ट हो पाएगा नहीं हो पाएगा, ये चीज है नहीं है. अरे मतलब you actually cannot do anything about it now. मतलब तुम अपने resume के content को change नहीं कर सकते हो. It's just कि तुम जो तुम्हारे पास content है उसको तुम कैसे अच्छे से present कर सकते हो. So stop worrying about all those things. मतलब rather focus your energy on what is in your control, and that is how you present your resume, how you make it. So focus on making a good resume, get it reviewed, and focus on your case prep. ठीक है, अभी इन दो चीजों पे फोकस करो. जैसे जैसे कंपनीज आती हैं, जैसे जैसे रेज्यूमे शॉर्टलिस्ट आती है, उसके बाद फिर स्पेसिफिक सीनियर्स को रीच आउट करके उनके साथ प्रैक्टिस करनी स्टार्ट करो, उनसे और डिटेल में प्रोसेस के बारे में जानो. मतलब अभी और डिटेल्स हैं जो मतलब दिस इज नॉट द राइट टाइम टू डिस्कस अपॉन दोज डिटेल्स. मतलब अभी तुम ब्रॉड चीजों पे फोकस करो, रेज्यूमे बनाना और अपनी केस प्रेप पे, बस.
There is one more thing.
Yeah, Gulam.
Very general question, different type of question. That I was looking at the alums of IIT Kanpur who are there in the big MBBs, and one thing I observed that all those people who are at higher position, all are the IITK graduates plus some IIM postgraduates. So is it necessary to get the postgraduate degree from any IIM to get at higher position in McKinsey or BCG or Bain? Is it a must?
I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. So typical trend, again, I'm stereotyping or I'm giving the typical trends over here. People who these consulting firms after IITs, typically if they want to go for an MBA, they go to the US for their MBAs and not IIMs. There might be a few exceptions over here. And the IIM folks that you might be mentioning over here might have directly joined these consulting firms after their IIMs. They won't be present in these consulting firms between their IIT to IIM beach wala bhi. So
like in for example, if we take the example of Bain, so the hierarchy is like first consultant, then managers, and then the partners. So I have seen that mostly the partners are the postgraduates of either the IIMs or from some other major business school. So how much how important is that to get a degree from any postgraduate school, business school, to be placed at any position like that of partner in Bain?
So I think one point I would like to mention over here is that there would be a statistical bias as well, because all these three firms hire a lot more people from IIMs rather than IIT. So obviously more people from IIMs would be at the partner level. But in terms of MBAs, these firms do encourage MBAs as well, but it's not a must, I would say. There are people who have just done undergrad and have gone on to become partners. But as I said previously, there is a statistical bias over here that they recruit generally more people from IIMs. So obviously more people would be there at the top as well. So it's not a must, as I to summarize. Hello. It's not a must, but it's also encouraged. Hello.
Hi, hello. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi, Vedanth. So I just wanted to ask, are you aware of any changes for the plan, like the Bain's plan for this time full-time rule? Like, is it coming on this August or December?
So I am not aware of any such changes. So I mean, till any message is confirmed from the relevant bodies, let's say the president or the placement office, I would suggest that you stick to this timeline. If there are any changes, I mean, definitely the relevant bodies would let you know as soon as possible. As soon as it is decided, they'll definitely let you. So currently, till any communication comes from there, you can assume that it will happen according to the regular timeline.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, quick thing I would like to address here as well. I mean, I see there are few Y20s over here as well who are probably here for Bain's internship process, right? So, I mean, everything I think Anshika covered about the preparation as well as the case solving approach, everything would be similar to that of the full time. Just in terms of resume, you probably won't have any big name internships, or you probably won't have any typically, I mean, the Gen 6 or any OPC or any other PORs as such. But what you can probably do is follow the framework that I mentioned in presenting whatever content that you have in terms of internships or PR. Mention the objective or the context of the problem that you are solving. Mention what are the actions that you took, and try to portray some sort of interpersonal or leadership traits in those actions. And finally, the results that you did. So it doesn't matter probably that you don't have a big name internship or a big name POR for that matter. So that should be the approach for internships. And probably Bain will also know that, given that you have just completed your 4th semester, you might not have these things with you currently. So yeah.
Okay, so as I can guess, there is not any more question from the participants. So that brings up to the end of this wonderful session. Thanks a lot, Amit, Vedanth, Anshika, and Manali for this insightful session. And we wish you all the best for your upcoming consulting experience. And also thanks to the audience for your kind cooperation. Thank you very much.